Welcome to the Real Estate Syndication Show. Whether you are a seasoned investor or building a new real estate business, this is the show for you. Whitney Sewell talks to top experts in the business. Our goal is to help you master real estate syndication. And now your host, Whitney Sewell.
This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, our guest is Gene Trowbridge. Thanks for being on the show again, Gene.
Happy to be here, Whitney.
I'm always honored to have you on the show, and I just want to compliment Gene on his ability, or his knowledge of this business. And I encourage you to look him up if you do not know of him. He's been on the show numerous times. We've talked about so many aspects, important aspects of this business on the legal side that you must know if you are an operator or a passive investor. But he's the founding partner of Trowbridge Law Group, LLC. And I mean, he helps, over 400 clients. He does 506C, NB offerings, Regulation D. And a point that I like to also make about Gene is that he's a former syndicator. So he's done both sides of this business and understands this business extremely well. He's a CCIM senior instructor and won numerous awards. I also want to say he's written the book called It's a Whole New Business, which actually, you may not be able to see it, but I'll go ahead and hold mine up here. I've got a couple copies of those, and we'll sometimes even give them as gifts to other people in the business. And so just encourage you to have that book on your shelf as well. But Gene, welcome again to the show. And I want to tell the listeners, Gene and I, or I should say Gene, he's going to go through the Private Placement Memorandum. We're going to discuss some things as an operator and as an investor that you should know about the Private Placement Memorandum. We're also going to do following shows elaborating on the operating agreement and the subscription agreement as well. So I know just going through the capital raise process for deals that we're doing, there's so many questions, right? Well, how do you fill out this document? Or what does this question mean? Or if I'm an entity, does this mean this? Or, how do we do that? And so I'm looking forward to Gene just elaborating on some of that. And you as a listener being able to have a better understanding, whether you're an operator or a passive investor, you'll know better about what you're looking at and looking for. So, Gene, thank you again, and let's get started.
Okay, good, Whitney. What I've done here is I've put together a sample set of documents, Whitney, that I'm going to demonstrate. This happens to be a sample set on a blind pool, which you're going to find out there's no specific property in this. These sponsors were going to buy multiple properties, and that's a hot topic today in today's environment. But as you're going to see, it's still worth looking at this because there's very little difference between the blind pool operating offering documents and the specific property documents. I will say,
I would tell the listener too that this would be on YouTube. If you can go, you can watch it there. You can actually see the exact document that Gene's going to be talking about. But either way, you're going to learn a lot, just by listening to him talk through many of these points. Okay. Go ahead, Gene.
So that's right. If you're watching right now, I have the document on the screen, and I think I've blown it up. Large enough so people can see it. Right, Whitney?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And this is not going to be a monologue. Whitney, you just chime in, interrupt me, whatever, as we go forward, because we got a lot to cover in 30 minutes, and I'm like a railroad train going down the track. But overall, I just want to make one comment. There are a lot of different private placement memorandums out there. Every attorney has their own craft, their own art. If this was science, there would be one private placement memorandum for the entire world, but it isn't. It's somewhat art. However, in Regulation D, there's something called Guide 5, and Guide 5 tells the attorney how to draft the offering documents, tells them how to do a PPM for a real estate investment. And so every PPM is going to have all the sections that we talk about. We may not all put them in the same order, and we may have different, as I said, the art of the deal here on what inside each section it says. But these are my documents, and this is the way I do it. So the very first thing we're going to see is a summary. And this has all sorts of information in it, Whitney. It says that this private placement relates to the sale of interests in, here you go, Trowbridge Apartment Group, a Texas limited liability company. The unit price, the minimum and the maximum, and what the time frame is. So in this offering, we're going to have $10,000 units. The minimum is $5 million. So when the sponsor hits $5 million, they can break impounds and go out and use the money to buy the property, or $15 million is the maximum. Now, in a blind pool, you're going to buy multiple properties. So the minimum should be enough to at least buy, according to your business plan, buy one property. In a specific offering, we may have a property that takes an awful lot of rehab, and maybe you're going to raise the money and do the rehab yourself. But for maybe $3 million, you can close on the property, but it's going to take you another $3 million to do the rehab. Well, in that case, the minimum would be just enough to close the property, and then you keep raising money until you hit the maximum, and then you'd have enough to do the rehab. And here's the timing. It tells you when the offering commences. There's a minimum. We have to raise the minimum dollar amount by August 31st, and then we have until February 28th. Now, this isn't a normal document. I did this to demonstrate that you have 1 year. Under Regulation D, the maximum time you have to raise money is 1 year, because the Reg D form, the Form D you file, is only good for a year. So if it's more than a year, you have to come back and do some modifications. But I set this up so you'd see it starts in March and ends in February. And then this offering is interesting because it says at the sole discretion of the manager, we could go to 20 million. Why that's important is I have clients come to us, Whitney, who say, well, I want to raise 20 million. And I say, well, that's good, but if you raise 15, you're going to be a failure. Some people are going to think you're a failure. So why don't you just try to raise 15, and if it's going well, you can always go to 20. So there's an example of the art in the deal, right? So that's an important part, the summary. And then, and I'm not going to go through all this, is all the disclaimers. One important part about this offering is this is a 506C. This offering allows us to advertise and to anyone, but only take accredited investors. That really will show up more importantly in the operating agreement and then the subscription agreement. But that just really tells you what's happening. In 506C, we can advertise limited to accredited investors. In 506B, we can't advertise. We can take sophisticated and accredited investors. So all this stuff is here. One of the things that, there's a reason it's capitalized, because Guide 5 tells you to capitalize it. So that's all it is. And this is really, really boilerplate. Okay. Now, the PPM is the story. Okay, the PPM is really the story of all of it and should be, as much as you can, written in plain English. The operating agreement is the legal document that tells you the legal rules of how you're going to implement this story. And the subscription agreement is really the investor's offer to buy part of this offering and some background information they're giving the sponsor to justify whether the sponsor would accept them. And so we start out in my documents telling the story through an executive summary. And this is really important to read. Maybe it's 2 pages, but it has a lot of stuff that talks about the company's objectives. And here's what we're going to do. This one is going to just buy 2 or more properties in major population centers in Texas and Arizona and Florida. Okay, so even though it's a blind pool, we're putting handcuffs on the sponsor, right, Whitney? The sponsor can't buy a retail property in Nova Scotia. Okay, you've got to buy multifamily in Texas, Arizona, and Florida. And then it tells who the manager is. The company
Should they limit themselves too much right there in those objectives?
Well, I think they should limit themselves reasonably. I think Texas, Arizona, and Florida it's a big market,
Right.
and I think that's okay. That's somewhat of a marketing question. If I put together an offering and said I can buy an apartment anywhere, you'd have to have pretty good confidence in me. But if my track record is Texas, Arizona, and Florida, that's where you want me to buy properties, right?
Right.
So here's the company information. The manager of the company is a separate entity, Trowbridge Manager LLC, and that's who's going to be in charge. And that will be described. All these sections will be described more thoroughly in the rest of the PPM. What are we going to do? We're going to purchase, rehab, manage, refinance 2 or more properties in these states. And the properties will typically have a minimum of 150 units. Now, I think that's another restriction, but I also think it tells people what we're going to do. One of the reasons you would invest in a blind pool, Whitney, is so that you could get the diversification of multiple properties. So we don't want all the money to be spent on one property. We don't want an 800-unit property and a 40-unit property. We want to know what's going on, and this is based on the manager's track record and their experience. And then here we go, a kind of repeating everything. How many units we're going to sell, they're 10,000, how much we're going to raise. And one thing that's important is, in this case, the manager has set that no investor would invest more than 10%. That's important for a couple of reasons. Sometimes lenders put requirements on how much any one person can invest. The bad actor questionnaire is going to be required if an investor invests more than 20%. And sometimes a sponsor just doesn't want an investor with a large share who can command too much attention.
If they invest more than that, or the lender may require that individual to be underwritten just like the operator, right? And it become part of the general partnership.
Well, as you know, most lenders have either a 15 or a 20% limit. And if in fact you were going to let people invest as much as they want, somewhere else in the document, we tell them that if you do invest more than 20, if that's the lender's rule, then you can expect to be underwritten. And at all times, if you invest more than 20, you can expect to fill out the bad actor questionnaire. Okay, so we kind of want to limit it. This is a 506C, so only accredited investors may purchase, and the manager is going to do something to take reasonable steps, and we'll look at what that something is in the subscription agreement. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to send the investor through a third-party verification company to verify that they're accredited. Now, the timing of the offerings, we've kind of been through that, but I'm going to talk on this term. We're spending a lot of time on this summary, but that's what it is, a summary, and all the other sections just expand on it. It says, after breaking impounds, which is the $5 million, the offering may remain open through the end of February next year. But if in fact the manager wants to stop, let's say the deal isn't going. So let's say there's a virus hitting the country and all of a sudden people aren't investing. The manager can just end the offering, send people their money back, and bring it out later. That's fine. At any time, the manager can stop. The manager may vary, and I've had this happen before, raise enough money to buy one property and find that buying the second property isn't so easy, and just stops the fund and gives people their money back. except for the one property, and tells the investors this is what we're going to do, one property. But in a specific property, it's enough to buy the property, enough to go ahead and do the rehab and all the other things. So that's good. Allocation of profit and losses, just a summary. This is simply an 80-20 deal with no preferred return. On a blind pool, when it takes a while to buy properties, we typically don't deal with the preferred return. On a specific offering, you're buying the property, and in 3 to 6 months, you can start making some distributions. Then I would see a preferred return. Then it talks about, risk, liquidity, and all that's going to be covered in the operating and the rest of the documents. This is an important clause. I get this question all the time. Probably the third most asked question is, Gene, I've got an investor who's got some money sitting in a 1031 account. Can they invest in your deal? And the answer is no. And we say that 3 different times. Short story, buying in this deal doesn't buy real estate. The only way 1031 works is if you're buying real estate. What you're buying here is a share of whatever. Okay, so that's
now. If this wasn't a blind pool, could you accept 1031 then?
No, because all you're buying is a share of it says the interests being offered are personal property, partnership interests, and as such, they're excluded from a 1031. You have to get a deed. And I'm sure you've had someone come and talk to you about tenant in common offerings, and that's where that would come up. So now I put this in my document. I give people instructions. What should you do with this? Well, you should read these. And I say the offering package has several documents: the private placement memorandum, the operating agreement, the subscription booklet, and any additional exhibits. And I talk about how you should read this. And then there's the infamous table of contents. And that's helpful. So we start out with suitability standards. I don't have to go through this. This is a 506C offering. So basically the suitability is you've got to be accredited. However, just because you're accredited doesn't necessarily mean you're suitable, right? You may have net worth, but you have little liquidity, and this is $150,000 minimum. One of the questions I have in the subscription agreement for this is, after you invest your $150,000, how much cash do you have left over? So you want to make sure the investors are suitable.
So if somebody said 100, or somebody said, $10,000, you might say, okay, this is probably not the best investment for you.
And the sponsor has absolute discretion to discriminate. Absolute discretion. Duration, everyone is interested. How long are you going to have my money? And here it says 3 to 7 years, but we'd like to sell it somewhere between 5 and 7. So I'm looking at that. I'm 72 years old, and my question is, do I want to be in a deal that's going to go for another 7 years? Well, that might depend upon if I'm investing my IRA money or other money or what my portfolio is. So that's where you find that. Then we have a clause on general solicitation is accepted. See, if this was a 506B, this clause would be totally different. No solicitation. Okay. And here's accredited investors. We all know what an accredited investor is. So all I've done is gone through all the different definitions of accredited investor. We're usually using $1 million net worth or $200,000 or $300,000 of annual income. Then there are other definitions. Family offices and banks and institutions can invest. So that's good. Once again, the dreaded unsuitable for 1031 clause comes in here. no matter what. My sponsors don't read this, and they still call me. Okay. And then here's something, restrictions for the Patriot Act. This particular sponsor is willing to accept foreign investors. So you have to go through and talk about what happens when you take someone in the Patriot Act. It's really confusing. I'd really suggest that you don't. This whole section is really a catch-all. Here's a comment about ERISA. And basically this comment says, yes, we can take IRA money, but a lot of people think that if that there's a limit on how much money can be invested through IRAs in a real estate offering, and there isn't. And so I quote the law that when 50% or more of the assets are operated by the company and are real estate assets, this 25% exception doesn't qualify. So we could raise 100% of our money in an offering like this in an IRA. This tells you, hey, you're going to give me a subscription agreement. I'm going to review it. Okay, so that's all boilerplate stuff, whatever. And here's the summary. Now, the summary is really an explanation or expansion of the executive summary we had. It talks about the company, talks about the manager, how to reach people, talks about that there are going to be two classes. This is important. Investors are going to buy Class A units, and they're going to be called Class A investors. And you can raise 5 million, up to 15, up to 20. Good. Then there's Class B members. Here comes the managers, or members of the manager, as it will. They're going to retain 20% of the ownership in the company, of the ownership. So this says that the Class A members would put up 100% of the money and own 80%. The Class B members don't put up any money as the managers to own their Class B membership and gets 20%. Somewhere along the line, you're going to wonder if the Class B members actually invest. And this document will tell you how much the Class B members, in this case, our Class B members were going to invest collectively $300,000 as A unit holders. So they're going to invest just like you would and I would, Whitney. Okay. But in addition to that, for doing all the work, they're going to get 20% ownership. Okay. So that's explained. And then we go back and talk about the minimum investment amount, the timing, we did all that. It's a blind pool. So in a blind pool, we have an acquisition strategy. It tells people what we're going to do, but here is how I write my offerings. I want the sponsor, whether it's a blind pool or a specific offering, to give me a separate document that's their business plan. In a blind pool, because we don't have any properties, it's track record, bio, and what is our acquisition strategy. Whitney, in a blind pool.
What is there a name for that document that's a separate document?
Yeah, it's called Exhibit 4, but probably we call it the investment summary or the business plan. But it is Exhibit 4. In a specific offering, it's the property package. It's the offering memorandum, whatever you call it. It's got pictures and rent rolls and all that stuff.
So like the investment summary that we would provide.
Right. And what's important about it is it's a separate document, because while you're going through 3 or 4 weeks of due diligence and loan underwriting and all this, things change. Well, let's keep it in a separate document. That's where all the changes happen. So these documents are kind of set, and you can use that separate document to show to investors while you're waiting for these documents to be done, to get initial indications of interest. That's your marketing package. I keep it separate. Okay, so, and that's what it is. And it talks about properties, what type of financing we're looking at. Can the manager make advances and loans? You know, if we need the manager to advance money, yes, the manager can, but we specify the interest rate so that everyone understands. And here's the objectives. And then we get into voting rights. And what's really important on the voting rights is that the unanimous vote of all the members, that would be all the A members, would be required to substantially amend the agreement. However, there are other voting things. 75% of the Class A members, not including the interests owned by the manager, would be required to remove the manager. And then 50% will be required to do major decisions. Now, that needs more explanation. That's the operating agreement. The operating agreement in Article 6 will give you bullet points. What are major decisions? If we want to get rid of the manager, it has to be for cause. What do we mean by for cause? That all is covered in the operating agreement. And then there's some information on what depreciation method are we going to use. Sometimes accountants want to know that. Some companies are going to be self-liquidating. When the properties sell, the money goes back. That's a holdover clause from the days when we were doing a lot of flipping. We let the person who sells property retain the money and buy another property during the first 3 years. Okay, but now people want to know, how is this going to happen? Well, when the property is sold, whether it's 1 or 2 or 5, the money goes back and it's over. And then we throw in a section and say the definitions are in section 13. Here's an important part. Sources and uses of proceeds. What we need to do is we need to tell the investor exactly how the money is being spent. We're only interested in the cash that we raise, telling the investor what are we going to do with it. This offering has a minimum dollar amount of $5 million and a maximum. And because we really don't know a lot, in a blind pool, we raise $5 million, that's the minimum. There's $5 million available for the investor for the sponsor to invest. And we're saying that he can spend $4,900,000 on pro forma acquisition costs, defined as the acquisition cost of the property, costs associated with the acquisition, costs associated with preparing the property for its intended use. Everything combined, $4,900,000. And then we have $100,000 left over for working capital. Now I'm going to jump over here to the maximum. At $15 million, we can reimburse the sponsor for their legal fees. So we now have this amount of money. And we're going to have $14,770,000, and we plan on $200,000 for working capital. Now, Whitney, if you're doing a specific offering, there are many more lines down here, many more lines. Closing costs, rehab, reserves, all that stuff, but we don't know in a blind pool. So you get the picture.
So it's a good place for a limited partner to go to see what some of the funds are being applied to and how we're doing that.
Absolutely. And this is only having to do with the funds. Sometimes I see a sources and uses of capital description, which starts with the mortgage and all that. That's not what we're doing. We're showing people how the money's spent. The two most important columns are the percentages. How are you going to compare this offering, which is $5 million and $15 million, with another offering that's $3 million and $5 million? Not comparable. But as far as the source and uses of cash, it's comparable if you break it down into a percentage.
Yeah.
In this offering at the maximum, we've got 99.8% going to investment. Okay. A lot of money goes into the property, and here we have working capital. What's missing from here? an organization, a due diligence fee, an acquisition fee, an organizational fee that the sponsor might take at the very beginning, especially in the specific offering. We don't do that. Oh my God, these guys are working for free. No, they're going to take an acquisition fee when they buy a property, which is very typical in a blind pool. In a specific offering, they might say, here's a line acquisition fee. We're going to get paid 3% of whatever the property is worth. Fine. So what does that do? That money doesn't go into the property, that goes to the sponsor. So then this number is less. So you compare offerings based on the percentage. The percentage is not the dollar amount. And that's right out of Guide 5. Okay, so Article 4 takes you through this is called Section 4 in the operating agreement, takes you through the distributions. It explains how the cash is going to be distributed. That's just an expansion of the executive summary. Article 5 has a nice table in it. It tells you how the manager's fees are going to get paid. And this one has a annual management fee. It has a acquisition fee, a refinancing fee, and a disposition fee. This is just in a chart. In the operating agreement, we explain it in more legal language. Then the document goes to the conflicts. There's all sorts of conflicts when a manager, a syndicator is doing more than one deal. And then the duties of the manager to the members, it's kind of boilerplate. Typically, the duty is you've got to treat a member the way you'd want to be treated. And here's all the risks. You should read this. The risk factors some relate to the company. This is a brand new company. It has no track record. Let's talk about that. There are risk factors associated with real estate. Where are we going to get to 8.2 here? Relating to the properties, okay? What projections are we going to have? We don't have any right now. How about owning real estate? How about investing in a group? All these things. Man, if you put this first, no one would invest. So I don't put this in the PPM first, but those are all very good things to read. Income taxes. Do income taxes ever change? Sure they do. You're going to have a property for 7 years. Some things are going to change. Now, we get down to a lot of stuff. Prior performance, well, if there's information about the track record, Whitney, it's going to be in Exhibit 4. It's going to be in the investment summary. And then we go through some boilerplate stuff. Let's regurgitate the investment objectives and policies. Article 11 is what else is here? Are we going to do insurance? Are we going to do other documents? And here is the exhibit list. In the PPM, Exhibit 1 is going to be the certificate of formation. So you can see that the company is actually formed in the state and when that was done. Exhibit 2 is the company agreement. Exhibit 3 is a subscription book. And 4 is the executive summary or property package or the business plan, whatever you want to call it, for the specific offering. And then our favorite section is Section 12 that everyone devours. It's a section on the IRS. Okay, no one reads it, but we put it in there. That's really in there for the accountants, right? And here comes all the definitions, all the way through the documents we have, capitalized items that are all defined. And as you're reading, you can look at this. Now, this document gets signed by the manager, by the syndicator. No investors ever sign this document. So here's the signature page. So that's all that's in the PPM, and there's not an awful lot of legalese here. the legalese really is in the operating agreement. And we'll have to plan better and a better use of our time when we go through the legalese and the operating agreement. Maybe we'll cover 5 sections that are really important and delve into it within the allotted time, Whitney.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm happy to, us talk about the PPM again and us elaborate on some more things if we need to. We just have a couple minutes, Gene, but if you had to pick just, let's say 3 to 5 things or some things that, let's say a limited partner needs to focus on for sure. A lot of them I know do not read the whole 100 pages of a PPM. If you had to pick just a few things that, okay, if I have 30 minutes today to review this PPM because I have to, make a quick decision, what are some things that they definitely need to read?
Okay. They need to read, they need to look at the table of contents. And this summary of the company really tells the whole story. They need to read that. Then if they want to know what's being done with the money, Article 3 or Section 3, the sources and uses, 4, distributions, 5, managers' fees and compensation. 2, 3, 4, and 5. That'll give you the real story about how this offering compares to other offerings. A lot of the other stuff is really important, but it's present in every offering. But 2, 3, 4, and 5 separate this PPM from other PPMs, Whitney.
Nice. I'm grateful for you just elaborating on the entire PPM, but then also highlighting those points that are important because it makes sense because those things are going to be different per deal or per operator, while a lot of the other parts of the document are going to be standard.
Yeah. No, as an attorney, my art is drafting the documents and helping the sponsor and helping the investors. However, there's no doubt boilerplate comes into play. But every PPM has to be specific for this offering. I say this to the sponsors who are out there who think they can draft their own documents. They can take a boilerplate, things go bad, you're on the witness stand, and the other attorney, the attorney representing the investors, said something like this, I don't even know what this offering covers. You didn't say anything about this stuff. And the judge will say, I've read this offering myself and I have no idea what it's talking about. It's got to be specific. And where is it specific? Sections 2, 3, 4, and 5.
There's no way that I could imagine trying to draft my own documents like this. There's no way. I just think every penny spent to somebody like Gene is so worth it because he is the expert, and this is not some place I want to spend. It's not my best use of my time. I'm not an expert there, but that's why we're going to hire somebody like Gene. Gene. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but tell the listeners how they can get in touch with you, learn more about you, and then I want to tell the listeners as well. Over the next few days, we're going to do other shows on the operating agreement and the subscription agreement and go through some of those as well. So it's great information and it's a must listen if you're an operator or a limited partner, passive investor, either one. But Gene, how can they get in touch with you?
How about I'll just give you my website? Okay. TrowbridgeLawGroup.com. And there people can set up an appointment, can talk to me and find out how to get a hold of me. That's probably just the easiest thing. TrowbridgeLawGroup.com, and it is Gene at TrowbridgeLawGroup.com. One last comment. I know you're out of time, but this is valuable. You showed a thick book, my thick book, volume 2, the second edition. The second edition had sample documents. The third edition doesn't, because people ripped that book apart and took my sample documents to write their own documents. And some people even had the nerve, if I would call it, to say, hey, I've drafted my own documents. Will you review this? Oh. And they're my documents. How I know they're my documents is in the private placement memorandum, spell check, didn't catch. manger member as opposed to manager member. And so I get these documents and I look at it and I know they're my documents. So the third edition, which is thinner, doesn't have sample documents in it. Bye.
All right. Bye, Gene. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.